Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial in Canberra on this lovely morning. My name is Scott Bevan. On behalf of the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, the Director, Mr. Matt Anderson, and staff, thank you for joining us for the Anzac Day March in the nation's capital. The Returned and Services League of Australia Veterans March, organised by the ACT branch of the RSL, will commence shortly. For the coming years, the march will be held in these beautiful grounds of the Australian War Memorial, while enhancements are made to the memorial's parade ground and a new entry is constructed. Now, we're aiming to return to commemorations on the parade ground in 2024. Arriving in just a moment onto the forecourt will be His Excellency, General the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia and the reviewing officer for today's Veterans March, and Her Excellency, Mrs. Linda Hurley. Their Excellencies will be met by the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, and the Director, Mr. Matt Anderson. Please make welcome His Excellency, General the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, and Her Excellency, Mrs. Linda Hurley. His Excellency will take position alongside the Stone of Remembrance to review the contingents marching this morning. And we are delighted to be hosting the RSL March and participating contingents, the first full march for 3 years. Ladies and gentlemen, to signify the start of the Returned and Services League of Australia ACT Branch Veterans March, we will soon have the pleasure of witnessing a fly-past of a C-130j Hercules. The Royal Australian Air Force has operated the C-130 Hercules since 1958, starting with the C-130A, followed by the E and the H, and now the J model. It is the aircraft type that the Air Force has operated for the longest continuous period, spanning over half the lifetime of the RAAF, which is 101 years. Starting operational service in the Vietnam War, it has been employed on most Australian Defence Force operations ever since. Now, this aircraft is versatile. On some missions, it might take off from a long-sealed runway and land on a short unsealed strip in the middle of nowhere. Its versatility allows it to be employed in a number of roles, the favourites among crews being missions that directly help our community and our nearby international neighbours. On a natural disaster relief mission, for instance, it might carry a load of emergency supplies such as fresh water, food and temporary accommodation to be delivered on the ground or parachuted to an isolated group. Most people across all three services of the ADF have travelled in the back of a Herc at some point in their career, and they kind of fondly remember the noise, the vibration, and the not-so-comfortable webbing seating. Following this flypast, the march will commence and be accompanied by the members of the band of the RMC College Duntroon. Anzac Day is the day Australians and New Zealanders throughout our nations and across the world remember and reflect upon the landing at Gallipoli in 1915. And the spirit of Anzac, with its human qualities of courage, endurance, sacrifice, and mateship. These are among our most valued qualities as Australians. These qualities inspire and bind us together in the face of adversity. They continue to bring meaning and relevance to our sense of national character and identity. Anzac Day also honours that moment in which young Australians and New Zealanders forged in bloody sacrifice the bond within which our two nations now live. On this day, we pay tribute to the service of our veterans during ceremonies and with marches in cities, towns, and remote areas across the nation, and in a number of locations overseas. We also pause to remember those who have served in all of Australia's wars and conflicts, and the families who have supported them and continue to do so. And so begins the 2022 Veterans March as the first contingent approaches the forecourt. And the parade commander for this morning's march is Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch. In the unity of Anzac, John is accompanied today by Colonel James Keogh of the New Zealand Army, who is currently posted to Canberra. And they are joined this morning by Second World War veteran Mr. Les Cook. Les's story is extraordinary. He enlisted with his father into the army in 1940. Now, to be able to enlist, both lied about their ages. His father put his age down by 4 years, and Les put his up by 4. Les was in fact just 17 years of age on enlistment, and Les served with the 2nd 14th Battalion in North Africa, Greece, Crete, Syria, and the Pacific, including Kokoda. And following is a banner that helps define this day, the First World War Anzac Replica banner. The original banner was used by artillery units from the 1st Australian Division in one of the very first Anzac Day services held during the First World War. And here comes a Jeep and Land Rovers. The Willys Jeep, Land Rovers and a joint military police unit vehicle are carrying our less mobile veterans. So ladies and gentlemen, please give these veterans a very warm welcome. And the RSL ACT branch and sub-branches follow. Formed in 1916, the Returned and Services League of Australia is one of Australia's oldest and most respected organisations. And this year is the 95th anniversary for the ACT branch, and it sits over sub-branches Belconnen, Campbell-Russell, Gungahlin, Hellenic, Peacekeepers, Tuggeranong Valley, Vietnamese and Woden Valley. Here are the RSL Peacekeepers sub-branch, and you'll notice that distinctive UN blue beret worn by those members of the sub-branch. And Peacekeepers first deployed on operations to Indonesia in 1947. And here are the New Zealanders with the New Zealand flag being paraded today on behalf of the New Zealand Defence personnel currently serving in Canberra at the High Commission with the Department of Defence or training at various Australian service colleges. And following behind is the Korean War, personified and represented by Commodore Norman Lee, who served in the Korean War with 817 Squadron as part of the HMAS Sydney Air Group from 1951 to 52. And Commodore Lee is one of the last Korean veterans in Canberra able to march. The National Malaya and Borneo Veterans Association with the banner bearers Ian Davenport and Rodney Westbury. And this membership comprises veterans of the Malayan emergency and the Indonesian confrontation. And the emergency existed from 1947 to 60, and the Indonesian confrontation commenced in 1962. And the Vietnam Veterans Federation. This federation comprises veterans from the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army and the Royal Australian Air Force who served in South Vietnam during the period 1962 to 73. By July 73, approximately 60,000 Australian men and women had served in the Vietnam War. And now to the seas with the Naval Association of Australia, ACT branch. And its President David Manolis is joined by Vice Admiral Michael Noonan, Chief of Navy, who has served for 38 years. And forming in 1920, the association was originally called the Ex-Navalmen's Association. And following them is the HMAS Sydney Association. 5 ships have carried that name, that illustrious name Sydney, in the RAN. The first served in the First World War, the second during the Second World War, and was lost with all 645 hands through to the 5th Sydney, which was commissioned in 2020. The Fleet Air Arm Association of Australia, with the Navy's Fleet Air Arm established in 1948 and is based at HMAS Albatross near Nowra in New South Wales. And the Submarines Association Australia ACT branch with Commander Dave Strongward leading that contingent. And the Naval Warfare Officers Association. That association is a national association comprising of retired and serving naval officers who have either commanded or served in Australian warships. And now to the ground with the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery Association, and that regiment draws its history back to the raising of A Battery of the New South Wales Artillery on the 1st of August 1871. And the Special Air Service Association, it began as a company raised in Perth in 1957 and expanded to a regiment in 1964. And marching with the association today is Mr. Michael Ruffin, a veteran of Malaya, Borneo and Vietnam, who delivered the commemorative address at the dawn service. And here's the Royal Australian Regiment Association. Formed in 1948, the Royal Australian Regiment is the professional infantry regiment of the Australian Army. And the regiment has served with distinction in the Korean War, the Malayan emergency, confrontation in Malaysia and Borneo, the Vietnam War, East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan. followed by the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam. And simply known as the team, they consisted of specially selected volunteers who served throughout South Vietnam during the war. And Australian Rifle Company Butterworth. Rifle Company Butterworth was the operational deployment of an Australian infantry rifle company to RAAF base Butterworth in Malaysia during the communist insurgency between 1968 and 1989. Followed by the 11th Movement Control Group Royal Australian Engineers. And the Movement Control Group was first deployed to South Vietnam in April 1966, with elements located in Saigon, Nui Dat, and at Vung Tau. And here are the engineers, the Royal Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers Association, led by Colonel Larry Foley. And the Corps of Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers was established in 1942, with the title Royal bestowed in 1948. Followed by the Australian Commando Association. Now, this association of the ACT represents current and former members of Australian Commando units, including the M and Z special units and the independent units of the Second World War. Followed by those involved with communication. No barrier to banner today, but very heavily involved in communication, the Royal Australian Corps of Signals Association. And behind the Signals Association, the Australian Intelligence Corps Association, led by Brigadier Justin Rook. Formed in 1906, the Intelligence Corps have provided support to military operations from the mountains of Kashmir to the deserts of Saudi Arabia and into Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. And here's the Military Police Association of Australia. The Royal Australian Corps of Military Police can trace its history back to the Boer War. The Corps was officially raised in 1916 as the Anzac Provost Corps and renamed the Royal Australian Corps of Military Police in 1974. And the Royal Australian Army Medical Corps Association of ACT, led by Brigadier Craig Schramm, formed in 1903, the Australian Army Medical Corps has provided a service wherever the Australian Army has been committed. And the Army Medical Corps was granted the honour of the prefix Royal in 1948. The 8th Field Ambulance, Vietnam there. Followed by the ex-service women, carrying the blue banner, Bronwyn Henrick and Tony Sullivan, the green banner, Margaret Flett. And marching today behind the Ex-Service Women's Association blue banner and the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps and Army Women Association green banner are current and former service women of the Australian Defence Force. And the nurses, Australian Defence Force Nursing, led by Group Captain Kath Stein. The three nursing services of the Navy, Army and the Air Force have marched together united under this banner for many years now, and nurses have had a long and crucial and illustrious role in the activities of the Australian Defence Force from its inception right up until the present day. And here are the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps Association. Now, this corps can trace its origins to 1902, and since that time, Ordnance Corps personnel have provided the Army's supply support and personnel services that are essential to sustain every mission. From supply to transport, the Royal Australian Corps of Transport, it was formed in 1973 and is responsible for the movement of the Army, its equipment and personnel, using all modes of transport available in Australia and overseas. And members of the Corps have served in numerous ADF operations, including Rwanda, East Timor, Iraq and the Middle East. To the Survey Corps, The Canberra Survey Corps Association, led by Steve Cooper. And the Royal Australian Survey Corps was formed in 1915 and served as an independent corps until integrated into the Royal Australian Engineers in 1996, and subsequently into the Australian Intelligence Corps in 2018. And approaching now the peacekeepers and the peacemakers, led by David Windsor. Australian civilians have served on operational deployments since the Second World War. And men and women from the Departments of Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade, and the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Border Force and other agencies have served with the Australian Defence Force since Vietnam. And the multinational force and observers, and just as before you saw the UN Peacekeepers Blue Beret, the multinational force and observers wear their own distinctive beret, a burnt orange colour. And the multinational force and observers was established in 1981 to oversee long-standing peace agreements between Egypt and Israel. And here's the Air Force Association, led by the bearers, Group Captain Ernie Walsh and Wing Commander Michael Garside. Followed by the RAAF Association Wanderers Branch, led today by Wing Commander Gordon Pert. The association's membership is drawn from former and serving members of the Air Transportable Telecommunications Unit, which was raised in 1965 and due to changes in technology was renamed No. 1 Combat Communications Squadron in 1999. And to an icon of the skies, the Lancaster, and the Lancaster Association, led today by Flight Sergeant Simon Dent. Number 467 and number 463 squadrons, Royal Australian Air Force, were formed in the United Kingdom during the Second World War as part of Bomber Command. And in honour of those who served in these squadrons, Royal Australian Air Force officer cadets from the Australian Defence Force Academy have paraded their banner for the past number of years. Followed by number 2 Squadron Association. This squadron formed during the First World War as part of the Australian Flying Corps and operated over the Western Front. It saw action as a bomber unit during the Second World War, the Malayan Emergency and the Vietnam War. The squadron currently operates Boeing 737 wedge-tail aircraft. And approaching is 9 Squadron, RAAF Association, formed in 1939 as Australia's only fleet cooperation squadron. It operated Seagull and Walrus amphibian aircraft from RAN cruisers during the Second World War and the Rathmines base at Lake Macquarie in New South Wales. Equipped with Iroquois helicopters in 1962, the squadron deployed to South Vietnam in 1966, remaining until 1972. And representing those guarding those airfields, the Airfield Defence Association. Airfield Defence Guards have defended airfields since the Second World War. In more recent times, they've figured prominently in East Timor, with smaller numbers serving in training roles in the Middle East. Approaching is the South African Military Veterans Organisation of Australasia, led today by Carlo Vlok. During the First World War, South Africans fought against the Germans, Turks and Sans Souci, and then they served alongside Australian soldiers in the Second World War and the Korean War. And here are the Americans, the United States Armed Forces. This contingent consists of serving Americans posted to Canberra in various capacities, as well as retired and former military veterans now living in Australia. And ladies and gentlemen, integral to today are the Marshals. And our final contingent this morning is the Parade of Marshals. They have ensured all contingents who marched this morning stepped off in the correct order and on the right foot. And a number of the Marshals for today's Veterans March are indeed veterans themselves. So a big thank you goes out also to the Army cadets who have willingly volunteered their time to assist the RSL today. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could applaud once more for our parade marshals and for all they've done today in helping all our contingents. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking these splendid contingents of veterans who have marched today, supported by the members of the band of the Royal Military College, Duntroon. And may I also acknowledge the veterans who didn't march but who have still joined us today. Our thanks to you. And we also extend our sincere thanks to the Governor-General for reviewing today's Veterans March. The Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, and the Director, Mr. Matt Anderson, will now escort His Excellency General the Honourable David Hurley and Her Excellency Mrs. Hurley to the commemorative area, where the Governor-General will deliver an Anzac Day address to the nation. I encourage all those in attendance and those viewing at home to remain with us as the address is televised and streamed across Australia and onto the screens here in the memorial's grounds. As we await the Governor-General to deliver his address to the nation, let us reflect on the inception of Anzac Day, inextricably connected with the landings at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. This day commemorates that moment in history when Anzac troops were committed to their first major action of the First World War. In all, more than 130,000 lives were lost during the Gallipoli campaign. Service personnel from Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Newfoundland, France, India and Turkey, with many of these soldiers buried or commemorated alongside one another on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The following words are attributed to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, a commander of Ottoman forces at the Dardanelles during the First World War, and later the founder of modern Turkey. For many years, these words have formed part of our Anzac Day commemorations, reminding us of our journey and the bonds we now have as nations. Here are those words. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us, where they lie side by side, here in this country of ours. You, the mothers, who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. Anzac is about far more than loss. Perhaps the best reflection of the meaning of Anzac is to be found in Australian war correspondent Charles Bean's book, Anzac to Omion. In describing the evacuation of the Anzac Cove area at the end of the campaign, Bean wrote, "By dawn on December the 20th, Anzac had faded into a dim blue line, lost amid other hills on the horizon, as the ships took their human freight to Imbros, Lemnos, and Egypt. But Anzac stood, and still stands, for reckless valour in a good cause, for enterprise, resourcefulness, fidelity, comradeship, and endurance that will never own defeat." The late Colonel Arthur Burke pointed out that the spirit of Anzac is not confined to the battlefield, nor is it something that can be seen. He described the spirit of Anzac as, quote, "a powerful driving sensation that can only be felt. It is a feeling that burns in the heart of every Australian and New Zealand countryman. A warm, tender, fiery, even melancholy ideal that nurtures intense patriotism in the innermost soul of everybody." The Returned and Services League of Australia proposes that the spirit of Anzac is still experienced today in times of crisis or hardship. During cyclones, floods and bushfires, Australians come together to rescue one another, to ease suffering, to provide food and shelter, to look after one another, and to let the victims of these disasters know they are not alone. A final reflection on the Anzac spirit, held in the words that we say here every evening at our last post ceremony, can be attributed to Charles Bean. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved. And here we guard the record that they themselves made. We will now take you to the heart of the Australian War Memorial, into the commemorative area for the address from His Excellency, General the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia.
Good morning. This morning I'm speaking to you from the Australian War Memorial on Ngunnawal country here in the ACT in the Canberra region. And I pay respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, but also to the traditional custodians of the land wherever you may be watching from. And I'd also like to acknowledge our current serving men and women, our veterans, their families and their loved ones. This morning, Linda and I attended the dawn service here in Canberra. It was, after 2 COVID-affected years, as powerful and as poignant as ever. And that's not surprising. On Anzac Day, we're drawn to memorials, to marches, to moments of reflection, both in groups and privately. We remember those who have served, those who have made a supreme sacrifice, and the contribution that they have made to our country. On one hand, we don't need to ask the question why we do this. It's obvious. To honour those who have served and continue to serve our nation, and to acknowledge the debt that we will always owe them. On the other hand, considering why we pause to reflect and remember tells us much about who we were, who we are, and who we aspire to be. Over the past 2 years, I've been privileged to recognise the service of 2 men who came from worlds apart and from 2 vastly different conflicts. Teddy Sheehan, Victoria Cross in the Second World War, and Tony Jensen, Medal of Gallantry in South Vietnam. Both men set examples of bravery under fire. Their responses to danger and peril continue to inspire decades later. Their service was, as we often state, in the Anzac tradition. Following the 2 award ceremonies, I reflected on the continuation of the Anzac legacy and the characteristics we attribute that arise from it: mateship, courage, endurance and sacrifice. I asked myself, are similar examples readily identifiable across our military history? Do the characteristics still matter? I'm firmly of the opinion that the answer to both those questions is yes. To the first question, choose a conflict, an operation or a mission, and you'll be able to find similar examples. To highlight a few, Major Irene Drummond, the most senior of the nurses massacred on Banker Island in 1942. Her words to the nurses as they all face certain death: "Chin up, girls. I'm proud of you and I love you," speak to her own bravery and compassion. Courage and sacrifice, characteristics that are part of the Anzac legacy. Captain Reg Saunders was the first Aboriginal soldier to be commissioned as an officer in the Australian Army. Reg Saunders was the son of a veteran. He served in the Second World War and in Korea. After the Battle of Kapyong in 1951, he stated, "At last, I felt like an Anzac, and I expect that there were 600 others just like me." The Anzac legacy wasn't etched in stone at Anzac Cove. Each generation has built on it. Barry Martin, OAM, passed away last month in Queensland. 30 years ago, he deployed on peacekeeping operations in Cambodia, our largest deployment since Vietnam. At his funeral, his commanding officer said, "Barry could sense if something was not right with a soldier from 100 paces away. He was everywhere at all times and supported all." Mateship, that's a key part of the Anzac legacy. To the second of my questions, do these characteristics still matter? They do. We see them in the service of our modern veterans and those still serving. They have inherited the Anzac legacy and, through their service, have added to it and will hand it on. We're proud of them and we will always be there for them. It is critical that we continue to look after our veterans. Caring for mates is also a part of the Anzac legacy. To that end, we also recognise the contribution of their families and loved ones. The characteristics are not just confined to our people in uniform. They are evident in the actions of Australians today. We saw many fine examples of this recently in flood-affected communities in south-west Queensland and northern New South Wales. Countless acts of bravery occurred, most anchored in mateship in one form or another, and exemplified by courage and endurance. I sum up my reflections on the stories of Teddy, Tony, Irene, Reg and Barry, and noting that they are representatives of thousands upon thousands of others, as follows. Who we were. In the sum of the stories of those who have served, we see common characteristics and values. We see a continuous line from the diggers who landed at Anzac Cove through to those who served in the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, on peacekeeping operations around the world and in Iraq and Afghanistan. Who we are. We see the Anzac legacy in today's serving men and women, their families and indeed writ large in the community around us. These common characteristics and values, mateship, endurance, courage and sacrifice, are not unique to our military service. Our forebears took them into uniform, but their services, experiences and sacrifices have forever embedded them in our nation's DNA. And who we aspire to be. If we learn from the Anzac legacy, and if we continue to live up to it, history tells us that we can overcome any challenge. The Anzac legacy is not reflected in a single individual or a single event. Instead, it is the sum of thousands of stories of ordinary Australians who, when given a job to do, got it done, did it in a way that makes us proud and looked after each other during and after that task. Finally, the characteristics that we take from the Anzac legacy to define us, mateship, endurance, courage and sacrifice, are inherent in Australia. They always have been. They've been strengthened and reinforced in conflict and on peacekeeping operations, but they have always been at our core. We shouldn't shy away from these characteristics over any concern that they be viewed as jingoistic. They are real in us. They speak to our past, our present and our future, to who we were, who we are and who we aspire to be. And that should make us all optimistic about our future, lest we forget.
His Excellency General the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia. Thank you, Excellency, for your words and your reflections. Ladies and gentlemen, that now concludes our commemorations this morning. On behalf of the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, and the Director, Mr. Matt Anderson, and the staff of the Australian War Memorial, thank you for joining us here this morning. Have a good day.